Imagine a world where nearly everyone, up to 95% of humanity, lived on the edge of survival, scraping by with barely enough food, shelter, or security. For thousands of years, this was the reality for most people. From the dawn of farming to the eve of the Industrial Revolution, poverty wasn't just a condition, it was the norm. But what did it mean to be poor back then? What did the poor do to survive? And how did the very idea of poverty evolve over time? Today, we're diving deep into the history of poverty, from the agricultural revolution around 10,000 BC to the late 18th century, with a unique twist. We'll explore this through a historical lens, enriched by archaeological and paleontological clues that reveal the human toll of deprivation. Let's uncover the story of humanity's struggle and resilience in the face of poverty. Around 12,000 years ago, something monumental changed. Humans began to farm. The agricultural revolution, starting around 10,000 BC, transformed nomadic hunter-gatherers into settled communities. This Neolithic shift brought surplus food, population growth, and the rise of early civilizations like Mesopotamia and Egypt. But there was a catch: it also entrenched widespread poverty for millennia. As people settled, hierarchies formed. Elites, kings, priests, landowners, controlled the best land and resources, while the vast majority toiled for bare survival. Archaeological evidence, like cramped mud brick homes in ancient cities or simple burial pits with no offerings, shows this divide clearly. The bones of early farmers, found in sites like Catalhoek in modern-day Turkey, tell a grimmer story. Stunted growth, worn teeth, and signs of anemia from cereal-heavy diets reveal the physical toll of poverty on the masses, while elite skeletons show better nutrition and fewer stress markers. So, just how widespread was poverty? Estimating poverty in ancient times is tricky. There were no spreadsheets or censuses, but economic historians, like those at Our World in Data, have pieced together a picture. From the agricultural revolution until the 18th century, roughly 80 to 95% of the global population lived in what we now call extreme poverty, surviving on the equivalent of less than $2 a day in modern terms. That's barely enough for food, shelter, and basic needs. In ancient Rome, the urban poor and rural laborers made up the bulk of society, while a tiny elite lived in luxury. In medieval Europe, feudal systems meant 90% or more of people were peasants, scratching out a living on small plots. Across the globe, in ancient China, India, or Mesoamerica, agrarian societies followed similar patterns, with most people trapped in subsistence. Events like the Black Death in the 14th century briefly improved wages for survivors due to labor shortages, but for most of history, poverty was humanity's default state. What did the poor do to survive? For most, life revolved around backbreaking labor and subsistence agriculture. Picture this: 80 to 90% of people in pre-industrial societies were farmers or laborers, tilling fields, herding livestock, or harvesting crops on land they didn't own. In feudal Europe, serfs worked several days a week for their lords, farming the lord's fields in exchange for protection and a small plot for themselves. In ancient Egypt or China, peasants toiled in river valleys, building irrigation systems or laboring on massive projects like pyramids or the Great Wall during off-seasons. Archaeological finds, like worn sickles or simple plows, show how basic their tools were, making work grueling and harvests precarious. Women and children weren't spared. They wove cloth, gathered food, or worked alongside adults in the fields. Juvenile bones from Neolithic sites show where patterns from heavy labor, a stark reminder of their burden. In cities, a smaller group of poor worked as artisans, porters, or servants, but rural farming dominated, with lives tied to the whims of weather and war, leaving many vulnerable to famine. Poverty wasn't uniform across the globe or among people. In ancient China's Han Dynasty, heavy taxes and forced labor kept peasants poor, with little state relief compared to Europe's medieval almsgiving, influenced by Christian charity. In Mesoamerica, Maya commoners farmed maize under elite control, with skeletal remains showing signs of malnutrition. Meanwhile, nomadic groups, like pastoralists in Central Asia, often had less material inequality due to shared resources, though they faced scarcity during droughts. Women and children faced unique struggles. skeletal evidence from medieval Europe shows women with higher rates of nutritional stress, as food was often prioritized for men. Widows, orphans, and the disabled were especially vulnerable, often relying on charity or community support to survive, as ancient texts and poor laws reveal. Poverty wasn't just about economics, it was shaped by environment and culture. Climate shocks, like the Little Ice Age from the 14th to 17th centuries, caused crop failures and famines, hitting poor farmers hardest. Sediment cores and tree rings from regions like Mesoamerica show drought cycles that deepened poverty. Overfarming and deforestation, visible in eroded soils from ancient Greece or the Indus Valley, trapped peasants in debt and hunger. Culturally, poverty carried stigma. In ancient Rome, the urban poor, called the plebs sordida, were scorned, living in squalid apartments. Medieval sumptuary laws restricted what the poor could wear, marking them as inferior. Yet, the poor showed resilience. Archaeological evidence of shared tools or communal grain stores in villages highlights their strategies to cope, even in the face of relentless hardship. What did poverty even mean back then? The definition evolved slowly. In ancient societies like Mesopotamia or Greece, around 3000 to 500 BC, poverty meant lacking property, freedom, or basic sustenance, think slaves, debtors, or the homeless, as seen in texts like the Code of Hammurabi addressing beggars. By the medieval period, Christian and Islamic teachings framed poverty as a spiritual state, separating the deserving, poor, like widows or the disabled, from the undeserving, able-bodied. Alms and early poor laws offered minimal relief, but poverty was seen as inevitable. By the early modern era, from the 1500s to 1700s, enclosures and growing trade redefined poverty as vulnerability to economic shocks, like relying solely on wages without assets. By the 18th century, thinkers like Adam Smith began describing poverty not just as starvation but as lacking creditable living standards, like a decent shirt, marking the start of relative poverty concepts we recognize today. As the 18th century approached, poverty began to shift. Proto-industrialization, like cottage textile work in Europe, gave the rural poor new ways to earn, though still at meager wages. Land enclosures in places like England displaced peasants, pushing them into cities as wage laborers or paupers. Early urban slums, uncovered in 17th-century London digs, reveal overcrowding and poor sanitation, redefining poverty's setting. These changes set the stage for the Industrial Revolution, which would slowly begin lifting some out of poverty. But that's a story for another video. For thousands of years, poverty defined the human experience, etched into bones, homes, and societies. From the fields of ancient Mesopotamia to medieval villages, the poor, often 80 to 95% of humanity, face relentless labor, hunger, and exclusion, shaped by environment, culture, and inequality. Yet their resilience shines through in shared tools, communal survival, and sheer endurance. Archaeological and paleontological evidence brings their story to life, showing not just struggle but humanity's adaptability. What do you think? How does this history of poverty shape our understanding of inequality today? Drop your thoughts in the comments, like this video if you found it insightful, and subscribe for more deep dives into history's biggest questions. Until next time, keep exploring the past, it's got plenty to teach us.